Hopefully everybody can hear me. All right, so this talk specifically is going to focus on critical thinking and why it is really one of the most important things that we as pen testers can ever have. And actually applying that to pen tests is key throughout the life cycle, not only as an industry, but also as we grow as pen testers specifically. So who am I? Well, my name's Kizz Myanthia. I'm a senior pen tester over at HP Shadow Labs, and I've been doing this for a pretty long time. I got started way back in the 2000 era, and I've been doing this ever since. Really enjoy penetration testing, really enjoy information security, and it's kind of my passion more than it's been a career move or anything else. And hopefully, most people going into it kind of have built from that passion, that fun, that hobby, and are doing something that they love today. So, what is penetration testing? What is the actual? What do we have? Why do we have it done? What is the real goal? I'm asking. I want to see somebody. There we go. We got a hand. What is pen testing? Okay, emulating the bad guy, right? What are some of the things that we look for? What are the goals of a pen test? I throw temper tantrums if people don't answer me. Right, looking for weaknesses, looking for breaks. Yep. Right, figuring out what that actual cost is, right? What that organization could lose, what that actual monetary value, what that public relations value is. Anybody else? Go for it. There we go, making that real world example. So this big blob of text right here is what Wikipedia defines as a penetration test. It's a pretty good definition. It really is explaining that it's a real world test, a real world look at system security, at network security, at applications, and what the real world risk is to that organization. And it looks at the specific technical details. So when a pen test when a pen tester actually gives this information to an organization, they rely on that information. So a lot of pen testers at times don't realize how invaluable that information can be to an organization. If they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on security products, whether it's for monitoring and logging, whether it's for firewalls, whether it's for actually locking down the end users. Organizations spend lots and lots and lots of money on these controls. With our recommendations, they either decide whether they're doing it right or doing it wrong. And a lot of pen testers don't realize that. And by having that understanding and actually looking at the value that they're presenting to that organization, you can start to see the impact of directly with what you're doing and your work to what that organization actually needs from you. So if we find a major hole, if we find a significant vulnerability, an organization is going to spend their resources for remediation of that, whatever it is, whether it's SQL injection, whether it's some sort of a remote exploit. They're going to spend development dollars, they're going to spend remediation dollars, and they're going to look at that and say, okay, this is where we need to spend our money. If we turn around and say, okay, well, we have X number of lows, and they're going to go, okay, well, lows are very good. We can handle lows. That's an acceptable risk, and they can believe that they're doing something right. We as that pen tester really have to start adding that extra layer of information and giving them the full feel. And that's where penetration tests really become invaluable. So, as pen testers and hackers, we're thrown into dynamic environments and dynamic situations every single day. From having to work with large clients, small clients, old clients that have had systems online for ages since the computer was invented, to clients that have a very well and defined information security program, to organizations that can't even spell information security. We deal with organizations from every walk of life and every size, each and every day. And we have to ensure that we're at the forefront of making sure that we stay up with that technology, because when we keep up, we're able to then make sure that we're doing our best effort in providing that best value to those organizations. So, and the point being made is specifically that we as pen testers really have a knack for learning. We enjoy learning. We do this stuff outside, over and above, most times for what we would normally get paid, what we consider our job. And thinking outside of the box and thinking critically is asking that why. Why was this done? Why was something portrayed? Why was something installed? Why was something deployed in such a manner? And in many cases, we're able to determine the why or do the research, and as far as we possibly can go, gives us not only the knowledge, but also the ability to take that and apply that to future tests. We're able to take that human element of the feeling of what I've learned and what I've found, and actually apply that to not only what we're doing today, but what we're able to do in the future. So, what do I mean by don't be a tool? What is, and why did I name my presentation this? It's not really to be an ass, maybe a little bit, but it's really to discern or differentiate what we do and the importance of what we do versus just running a tool or just using the tools that are out there. We humans have the ability to perform repetitive tasks just like the tools out there. But we also have the ability to apply experience with things we do, outside thinking, feelings, and things that we've come to actually experience in other tests. And we can apply that and make sure that when we're looking at something, we're not just looking at it as face value. We're actually looking at what the other aspects are. So this is where we really kind of find the ability to find our foo, if you will. That aspect of, this isn't just cross-site scripting. What can we do with cross-site scripting? Cross-site scripting is a bigger issue than just, it creates a pop-up box with a couple numbers, right? That's all cross-site scripting is. Most reports that organizations or vulnerability assessments turn over are simply a pop-up box with a number value in it. Well, what is an organization that is not in the business of information security supposed to do with that? Without having that understanding, without having that person to give that secondary knowledge, all they know is that you can create a pop-up. When you start applying that thought process to, well, what if that pop-up was presenting a username and credentials login box? How many users are going to fall for a fake login page? Where does that exist, and what do we know that can be found or executed against that specific function or that specific location in an application? These are things that a tool can't differentiate from. So critical thinking and using every resource should be used, and not closing yourself off to just whatever that face value is more important than actually relying or just running a tool. So what is critical thinking? What actually is the process of thinking? And what does thinking tell us? What are some of the things that when we think, and the actual science, this isn't a technology question. What does the actual process of thinking give you? Anybody? All right, I'll throw out an example. It gives us information as far as what there is, right? What we're looking at. It gives us information about what's happening, what's going on with that application. What kind of problems are we running into? Things that are either a risk or where we're able to take that information or that vulnerability. If we have SQL injection, are we able to actually gain information from that vulnerability? Or is it just, we're just getting an error message, so now we have to go take another step and get more details? Why is something important versus unimportant? When we start thinking about the questions and start thinking about things that are not quite just what's presented to us, we can start getting a much deeper and a much more full version and understand what we're truly looking at. So why are these types of questions really useful? Why is it good to start asking questions of why or what are we looking at? There we go. Right, you can start to define your focus, right? All of a sudden, something huge becomes, oh, well, I've got 5,000 pages in this application, but I know that only 5 of them have a login page, and one of them is one that I'm getting an error message on. So now we're starting to define, and we're starting to reduce what we have to focus our attention on. How about anybody else? Why else are these questions really good? I'll come sit down by you guys, and I'll start asking you personally. What's that? Right, what's possible, what's impossible. How about how things should be viewed versus how we see them? Okay, how the developer expected them to be interacted with versus what we actually are doing. When we start taking these steps and start looking outside of just that norm, we start to experience and we start to understand more about not only the application, but we start to understand more about what our problems specifically are. And then we can start to determine what our answers to our problems are. So thinking and critical thinking specifically is important because it requires a conscious level of processing. Okay, you consciously are looking outside of whatever is presented. You're doing an analysis of all that information, whether it's technical data, whether it's previous experiences, whether it's things you know from other research. We're analyzing all of the data and all of the specific pieces of whatever that problem is, whether it's a vulnerability, whether it's a break in the application, what have you, and starting to look at the other pieces and parts that it plays with. And then it's also the creation and evaluation of possible outcomes. Now, if we have SQL injection, and we know that we have SQL injection, we know that there's certain things that we can take from that. We can take data from that, and potentially we can get detailed information for the actual server or the version of software that's running. We can get a lot of information all just from thinking about what our possible outcomes are. And then we get to turn around and we reflect on the things that not only did we come up with that could happen, but what the results were when we actually tried that. Critical thinking is that whole piece, that full circle, and understanding how that plays to doing a pen test will make you as a pen tester grow exponentially, and it keeps that process of being that forefront thinkers in the industry. So how does this really relate to pen testing? Well, every single day that we're out there, we're faced with changing world. We're faced with changing technology. We're faced with changing version information. From assessing the different types of clients and the different types of technologies, we have every single problem that a developer has. We have every single problem that a bad guy hacker has. We have every single problem that a support team has. We as a professional have to play the multiple roles and understand that through those multiple roles that we're able to actually gain more information and more experience that will make us grow and fulfill a more full role as a professional pen tester down the line. So we use tools every day. Every day, whether it's Burp, whether it's Akinetics, whether it's Metasploit, whatever it is, we use utilities to do our job every single day. And one of the things that these things do is they do a fantastic job at what they were developed for. They do a fantastic job at repetitive tasks. They do a fantastic job at cutting the amount of time that we need to spend on specific areas. But what do they lack? They lack the understanding to look further than just what they were coded to. A tool is only as good as the code itself. So understanding where to color outside the lines, it's one of those ideas that's drilled into us as kids is something that we don't want to do. We want to make sure that we stay in the lines, and we want to make sure that we stay and understand that we need to work in the constraints of whatever it was developed to do, whether it's an application, whether it's the way that we do things, whether it's a script or a specific methodology that we use. Understanding that we are there to follow the specifics allows us to only go so far. So this is dangerous for the future of information security because opponents, the ominous them, the bad guys, they're not going to play by the rules. They're not going to be the ones that are going to follow a specific methodology every single time. They're going to be the ones that are going to look outside that box, and they're going to say, okay, well, this developer expected me to go from A to B to Z to C to D, and now I'm able to go from A to L to B down all the way to X, and when I get there, I get it to break. They're going to start looking at it and start breaking it apart and looking at whatever that application is and whatever that problem is in the most dynamic and critical thinking way. So we need to use tools to accomplish our goals, but we have to look past just what's being presented at face value. We need to be able to use them, but we can't be used by the tools. So sometimes it's good to go with the pack. You know, you understand that you continue the same way, you go the same and do the same things that it was in the past. You follow the instructions, you perform your tasks, you keep the wheel turning, and you know, you never question the why or how because it's dangerous, right? Once you start asking questions or once you start breaking from that stride, something might break, right? Well, we need to use every aspect of our abilities to strive to be more and strive to look outside of what we're presented. So black hats, the bad guys, the real black hats out there, are probably the upper echelon of critical thinkers. They are the ones that sit every single day and try to figure out how to overcome everything that you're doing. You know, and will an attacker do things that are expected? Sometimes, sure. You know, there's certain things that most attackers will do to start that process. But the best ones are the ones that are not going to, abide by some kind of scope. They're going to start looking at that application. They're going to ask that question, why, how, and when, and where, from the moment that they look at whatever it is, whether it's a network, whether it's a system, whether it's an application. So they look at what they can touch, how they touch it, where it comes into play, and the importance of each one of those pieces. So why does this really happen? So if we take a look at security itself and applications, security defects are pretty much baked into the applications themselves. So security can be bolted on and built on as an afterthought, a secondary thought, and even, sometimes not even thought of at all. Even in departments that want to audit web applications that spend millions of dollars every year, lack effective tools and have impractical ways of managing, monitoring, and remediating a lot of these issues. So as a result, you have your intended functionality, which is developed by your development teams. These are the coded in functions. This is that business functionality. And then you have the actual functionality. So in a real world, you have the way that it's expected to work, right? And you have the way that it works is the only way it's ever going to work. Well, if we look at the real world, right, you have your intended functionality. You have that developer, that team that spent their time, their efforts to create an application that did one specific task. That task was to do X, Y, Z, whether it's to process bank information, whether it's to act as a social media site. They've built that out. We have the actual functionality, okay? You have the things that work, the things that don't, and there's certain versions of those breaks and those problems that are overlapping. You have your working features. This is everything that the developer intended to work. And then you have all the things that actually work, right? And this is the stuff that works flawlessly. You can do your posts, you can do your updates, you can do everything. Well, the functional defects are breaks within the actual technology. So this is going to be something like a SQL injection on that page because that application is passing clear SQL queries in the back end. You then have your security defects. These are going to be the way the application processes certain functions. This is going to be your business logic breaks. Once we understand that every application from the time that it comes out has flaws in it, we can start looking at the way that those classic or those repeatable issues can be applied as we move through each one of our tests. And when we start thinking about how we can apply that, we start thinking about those why, those whens, those hows, those wheres much sooner in the process. This allows us to gain the best concrete footing to take that next step. So where really does security fall? Security falls across the entire gamut, and it doesn't matter if you're doing a pen test that deals specifically with networks. It doesn't matter if you're doing a pen test that specifically deals with applications. There's vulnerabilities that fall within each and every single one of these groups. And when you start looking at all of the different pieces from the things that organizations have to keep up, you can start to see how all of a sudden it becomes overwhelming. If an organization was specifically focused on an application, had one vulnerability, and that was the only thing that they had to worry about and deal with across their information security lifecycle, how easy would it be for them to secure that? One vulnerability across everything they own. Be pretty easy, right? They know where to focus. They know exactly where they're going to deploy their money. They know exactly how to deploy their money. It's very easy to define and determine. Once you start looking at all the differences, when you start looking at network security, when you start looking at host and server level security, when you start looking at application security, organizations today don't understand how each one of those kind of plays together. Once you start getting into some of the larger organizations, they may even start breaking out those teams completely separate and cause, communication gaps. So now all of a sudden the infrastructure security team only talks to infrastructure but doesn't talk to the application team. You as a pen tester know that that application not only interacts with the user, but it also interacts with that infrastructure, right? Because the organization needs to provide holes in the firewall to allow that application to get to users. They need to determine what servers they need on the back end, whether it's SQL or some other database, things like that. They need to handle authentication. Are they going to integrate that with their internal network authentication? Understanding and a knowing and a knowledge of where and how each one of these play to each other really allows us to grow and provide that best picture and that best effort as a professional pen tester. So let's take a look at a real world application here. So we got a web page here, right? Capital One. It's got specific functionality. What types of things, when a user comes here, are they going to do? Apply for credit. All right. We got. What else are they able to do with just what we're looking at here? Log in. All right. So we've got authentication, right? What else can we do? Search. Well, we've got location search up there. So we've got a point where someone can find an ATM or a local branch. Anybody else? What else can we get? We can traverse different pages, maybe get some information about where those branches are if we're going to start looking maybe at a social engineering engagement. So from this point, this is where an attacker starts thinking outside the box. If we take a look here, this is just an example, okay? Maybe inside the URL line, maybe we're able to get information specifically to what sorts of forms or fields or where that application is pushing data. Maybe we can do some brute forcing stuff, right? We've got login. Are we able to get credentials? Are we able to do a username brute force? What are we able to gain? What about the search function and then the actual query function for local branches and ATMs? We've got SQL injection and cross-site scripting, right? When we start looking at what a user sees, and we start saying, okay, this developer made this app to do X, and that's all we look at it as, we start missing the big picture. When we start applying critical thinking, start thinking outside the box for what these little pieces can do, we start to get a whole new viewpoint. And by looking at the application from the standpoint of where can I break it and how can I break it, is really going to give us a leg up over not only just using the utilities and providing just a service, to actually becoming that professional pen tester and becoming that partner with whoever that organization is. So it really is a science versus art kind of discussion. You have your science, which is the critical thinking. So where does this come from? Where is that foo? Where is that force? Where is that ninja skill? Where does that really come from? Well, as much science is built into everyday life, whether it's the way that we apply, we go to work, most of the time we all go to work the same exact way. Why? Because we know that it works, we know our time, we know the data behind it. The next part is that art. So it took art to figure out what that route was. It took time to determine, to test which way is the best way to go. So the mystical overlap that makes us better testers is that middle ground. It's that interacting with or assessing the specific data and applying our experiences, our knowledge, our information across what we're trying to do to answer that problem. So the ability to look at a problem and ask questions and apply experience above, over, and outside of its face value is really key to becoming the best pen tester that you possibly can. But it's also the way to really understand applications, and it's what the bad guys, black hats, the real attackers are going to do every single day that they try to get into an organization or an application. So what is really the difference between thinking inside the box versus outside the box? What does that mean? What does it mean to think inside the box? You have boundaries, right? Okay, what else? Sticking with the norms, right? This is how we do it. We've done it this way forever. This works. We know it works, right? Anybody else? What's that? So it's, like was said, it's using those tried and true practices. It's doing what we know works because it works. It's relying on the prior experiences to drive exactly what we're doing and not changing from that. It's having that common understanding and support, right? Because if it's the way that it's been done, there's generally support to keep that going and not really look anywhere else because we know it works. It's worked for us forever, so why should we change? How about outside the box? What does that mean? Innovation, okay?
It's not thinking solely about what it was intended to do, but thinking about, taking everything that it was designed to do and thinking, what can I do that doesn't involve that?
Right. It's looking at what else can this do. I understand that this is a search function, right? I know that it can tell me where I need to go, but what else can it do? Anybody else? No? Is everybody falling asleep? What's that? What if, right. What if I do this? What will happen? Asking those questions are going to start giving you much deeper and much better answers as far as what type of information, what vulnerabilities, what breaks, what things are there that you can potentially play with as a pen tester, right? So it's accepting the risk of taking that next step. Thinking outside the box can be sometimes scary, right? If you all of a sudden know that for the last 3 years, your organization has had A, B, C, and D, you've done this on every test, but when you're on one of these, you see something that's just a little bit different. You see a better way to do it. It can be scary to present that, right? because all of a sudden, you're going against a norm. You're making a squeaky wheel. But the ones that were thinkers, those were the ones that actually started this industry. They're the ones that fired off and said, we know how to break this. We thought out of the box from the beginning. That's what drives the pen test and the information security industry. So when we experience a problem, we go through a natural process, okay, to determine what the problem is, right? First we say, okay, we have a problem. And whether that's vulnerability, whether that's a break in the application, whether that's a break in the functionality, we have something wrong, right? Next step is to identify specifically what that is. All right, are we dealing with cross-site scripting? Are we dealing with brute force attack against a password field? What is the actual problem that we're dealing with? The next thing is to start thinking about what else could this problem do? Okay, well, we know that if we put a single tick or single quote in a search field and we get a response from the database with a detailed database error, what else can we do? What can we probably do? Anybody else? If we're getting a detailed error message from a database from a single quote, what else can we do? Anybody? We can do other injections, right? Right? Because we know that database is functioning so that it's processing that SQL statement without any controls, right? So now maybe we can automate this. There's plenty of tools out there that can help us do this, but maybe we can start gathering information. Maybe we can take that next step. Maybe we can get what user that is currently, the application is currently using on that database. Maybe we can get the specific table or the database that we're sitting in. Maybe we can start getting actual username and credentials for that application user. Understanding and looking for those alternative solutions or those alternative outcomes starts to give us a broader picture of what could come of whatever we just found. And then we start to choose and we start to focus on those alternative solutions, right? If we know that we've got a single quote that causes an error message and we can start getting information, well, we can start focusing on pulling specific information, right? We're going to start targeting and we're going to start using our knowledge and our experience to grab the banners. We're going to start grabbing the detailed information specifically for tables, and then we're going to go to columns, and then we're going to go to rows. Why do we do it like that? Because I know that when I've done this in the past, this works much easier. Now I'm able to iterate through all of the data at a functional level. And then the next part is actually that action. It's implementing that action. So now we get SQL Map going, now we get SQL Ninja going. I know that I'm specifically going for tables or what have you, and we know that we need to be authenticated, right? So what do we have to provide? We have to provide our session information, okay? We have to provide our cookie values. So we know that if this is what we're going to go after, we're going to start thinking about this ahead of time. And then once we have everything together, then we can evaluate what the risk is, right? And once we understand where the break is, what the problem is, we understand the depth and understand what type of knowledge we're able to gain from that, and we understand how far we can take it, we can create that real-world risk. We can communicate that real-world risk to that client or that application owner or that system owner to allow them to understand not only why is this a break, where the break is, but what could potentially happen, right? And by actually working with that client or working with that organization, you not only become an invaluable resource, but you are able to learn through the process and apply that stuff later on in other tests. So this really kind of starts to begin with breaking the left brain and the way the left brain works and the way the right brain works, okay? So if we look at the left brain follows logical patterns, okay? It is objective rather than subjective. It is time, it is minute by minute, it is hour by hour. It is very sequenced. This is very tool-like, it's very computer-like. It sees things as true or false, black or white. It sees the details, it sees a specific tree in a forest as opposed to seeing the whole forest as what it is. It also houses short-term memory. Okay, so this is where all the stuff that you are going through and experiencing each day, that short-term memory is all stored in the left brain. And it thinks critically, perhaps negatively, but it's the side that actually asks why, okay? Versus the right brain. The right brain follows intuitive hunches. This is where the emotion sets. This is where the feeling is. It creates patterns without following step-by-step process. This is the side that will look further outside the box as opposed to falling in with the guidelines. This is the side that colors outside the lines. Okay? It's subjective rather than objective. It really looks at the whole piece. So instead of viewing, like the forest analogy before, instead of viewing that single tree, it sees that the entire forest is orange. So if the entire forest is orange, it's probably fall. It looks at a much broader and a much more open aspect to whatever the problem is as opposed to the left brain. It thinks positively, unconstrained by preconceived ideas. It has no understanding of what the past was, but it knows what it feels. And it asks, why not? Right? Because you have the question of why, and why will give you an answer, but why not can sometimes be a much more difficult question. Right? Because if we have something, or if we're going to do something, and somebody goes, well, why did you do it? And you respond, why not? That's a much different question, you know? That's the breaking the rules. That's the coloring outside of the box. That's the way to see what can and what can't be done. Very much more than following the rules, right? So if anybody was actually trying that, there's your answer. So you can do that with 4 lines and not break from the page. So what are some of the positives and negatives about thinking outside the box? Anybody? Besides what's up there? What are the good things about thinking outside the box? Why is it that I'm up here and I'm saying we need to think outside the box?
Most of the way your attackers are thinking, it's like defenders know how to build things from a defensive standpoint. Attackers are the ones that are trying to, attack you from things that you didn't think of.
Right. It's the way the attackers think, right? It's that trying to break something as opposed to building it. It's that real world viewpoint of how an attacker is going to go about doing this as opposed to this was developed to do X, Y, and Z, right? Who else? Yep.
You think outside the box, sometimes you're unpredictable.
Right. It creates unpredictability, right? And by creating that unpredictability and doing something that wasn't developed, you're going to probably end up causing a break somewhere. Those breaks are really what we're looking for, okay, when we're doing a pen test. Anybody else? Yep.
So, the way I think about it is that if you think, I used to say outside the box, you will only ever get to the point of where the boundaries of that box are. And so beyond that, where is that?
Right. So basically, you're constrained. You know, if you're inside that box, you're constrained by those 4 corners. That's as far as you can go, right? When you start thinking outside the box, all of a sudden you get to that innovation, right? That innovation, that free thinking, that next step, that the future. That's that bleeding edge piece of where information security is. How about the negative side? What's bad about thinking outside the box? Come on, this should be easier than the other question. Go ahead.
So, the corollary to what I said earlier is that being outside the box all the time, the risk is that you forget the history of the giants whose shoulders you stand on, who have learned their things before, and you can just go, what's from?
Right. So if you actually just live outside that box, you're not going to end up having a solid footing to stand on. You're going to forget about things. You're going to forget about little things. You know, all of a sudden, you're so far ahead that those little things from, 1998 or something like that is going to become a major issue. Without understanding the history and without applying that inside the box, that understanding, that science piece of it, You know, you're going to not have a full picture, and you're not going to be able to grasp onto every piece of it. What are some of the other negatives?
If you're always thinking outside the box, you're taking your focus off of operational consistency, which is sort of the whole point in trying to maintain security in the beginning.
Right. So outside of the box thinkers don't always focus on what the standards are, right? They're not there to see that constraint, that process that was put into place to get to wherever it is, right? It's much easier to get lost and go on tangents and find yourself 4 hours, 10 hours, 8 hours later going, I don't even remember how I got here. So, you know, there's a lot of risk, and there's a lot of things that are kind of scary when it comes to thinking out of the box. But when we start molding and melting both of these types of brains, both of these thinking patterns, we can start to apply a much fuller testing viewpoint into everything that we do as a pen tester. This is really that real-world viewpoint of the whole problem, the vulnerability assessment, the penetration test, the exploitation, and how that really plays to the organization. Once we have that full spectrum viewpoint, we're able to take that next step and we're able to apply that across everything that we do. So we begin to apply this to our testing and our vulnerability assessment by understanding the issue, right? That's our first step. Once we have the understanding, we can define what that problem is, whether, again, it's SQL injection or cross-site scripting or what have you. We identify what the vulnerability or the type of problem we're faced with. Once we understand the problem, we can then begin to look at where it is presented, right? If we have brute forcing in a login page, what are we going to probably look for? What are we going to look for if we're going to try to do brute forcing in a login page? Usernames. Default usernames. What else? What else do we use with usernames? Passwords, right? All right, we're going to start to try to enumerate through these. If we know that we can submit with no access controls, no lockout on a username and password field, we're going to start catering exactly what we're going to do, right? We're going to start focusing on word lists. We're going to start focusing our text. Why are we going to start focusing this? Why are we going to start that process of focusing on one thing versus another? Because our previous experiences, right? This is where we're starting to bring those two pieces together. So we can begin to look through our resources using Google Foo. We can start looking at every possible angle that we can do research on. Are there known exploits out there? Is there only a little bit of information about what we're talking about? Where is that problem and where is it presented within the application can give us our next step. And then we clearly define what we have to do, whether this is a fix for it, for our builders, or whether this is the exploit for it as our breakers. This is where we really define what our next step is and understand how we go about doing the next process. So this is the science side of the problem solving. This is the science side of when we're applying critical thinking. The next step is to actually create the ideas. This is the art side. This is the fun stuff. This is the stuff that we get to smile every time we get to play, right? So say we have SQL injection again. What can we do with that? Okay, if I have SQL injection, what can we're just talking plain old blank old SQL injection, no fancy, no nothing. What am I able to get from a database if I have SQL injection? What kind of information? More specific. Usernames, passwords, right? What? Okay, but generally you're going to get columns, table names. You're going to get the contents of that information, right? You're able to get the current user. You're able to possibly span into other databases on that database server, right? There's a lot of information that you can get from SQL injection outside of just causing an error, right? Because that's part of it, but being able to understand what that data is and actually use that data is where we start to look at the art of it. So once we have our list and we can begin testing and start playing with it and bringing out our paintbrushes, right? All our tools are our paintbrushes. This is where the brilliance of not being a tool really becomes, the brightest. This is where we can start to see how one piece plays to another. If we have a cross-frame or click-jacking vulnerability, and we have cross-site scripting that's also there, those might, cross-frame scripting might be found as a medium vulnerability on some reports or something. Whereas you might look at some tool and you have cross-site scripting that was gained from there. Now you start looking at the different aspects and how you can bring those together. This is where that true real-world mentality, that out-of-the-box thinking, comes into play. So we know what our experience has and what we've seen in the past. We can apply feeling, right? How many tools out there can apply feeling? None. That's a human quality. So if we see something and we see the way that an application is interacting, and time after time we see something that just doesn't look right, sometimes we'll get a feeling and start chasing down and start looking at that specific problem because we might think that there's something there. Good or bad, you may get lost down, in that world of out of the box for a while, but it allows us to think about and get an idea outside of just what that technical data is. So to understand what we see and to be able to act on it without requiring a script or play-by-play instructions separates great testers from everyone else. The ability to look outside the box and not have to go step by step is really what makes great testers versus everyone else. It's what differentiates those black hats that are successful, that aren't sitting in a jail cell somewhere, from everybody else. This is where our experience, our feeling, our thoughts directly interact with that science of our data. Okay? To understand what we see and to be able to act on it without requiring all that is going to make us that much better, that much higher level, that much more full tester as a whole. So, and then once we have our data, right? We have all of our data. We have our feelings. We have our ideas. We have the understanding of both sides. This is where we start the learning phase. This is where we can understand what we have, what the risk and the impact is. We can determine whether the impact is going to cost the organization money or if it's just going to hit users or what have you. We can determine what problems need to be fixed, right? This is where we can work to decide if this level of risk is acceptable or if it doesn't pose that big of an impact if it's exploited. This is also where we get to take the knowledge from our experiences and plan how we go to the next step. So all of a sudden, we've had this done. We've worked with an organization, we've done the pen test, and we've now have to work with them to figure out how to remediate that. And by understanding not only the fact of that break, and not only understanding the problem and everything, but understanding that remediation, will give you a much deeper knowledge and a much deeper understanding as a pen tester that will, again, play into your next test, play into your next experiences. So this is all common sense stuff, right? Right? I mean, we all do this anyway. Why spend the last, 50 minutes talking about this? This is stuff that we should know normally. Well, the way that the world works today is about speed and lowest cost. And thought is expensive. Thinking outside the box, thinking of new ways, thinking of innovation is expensive. Every security vendor out there will have some sort of marketing piece about how fast and how cheap they can find every vulnerability in your organization, every vulnerability in your application, right? They have the methodology down to a science that they know that they can repeat everything time after time after time after time after time. It's the way that the security industry is going. So it's that cost, that value, that speed versus cost initiative is going to start pushing the thinkers away. Because all of a sudden, if you start forcing that in the box thinking in an industry that was developed and started by out of the box thinkers. It starts closing that box off. So the information security industry was made by those blazing new trails, daring to think for themselves. They were the critical thinkers. They were the road pavers. You know, it's much harder to make your own road, okay? But to take that step, to go all the way into that dark point at the horizon, who knows where you're going to get, right? And it takes somebody with some balls to actually make that step. But that's why we love to do what we do so much, right? That's why for each and every one of us that are in the industry, information security industry, this isn't just a hobby. It's not just a job. It's not just a career. This all started as a passion for something, for figuring out something, for finding the problem, finding that answer to why and why not. That's why we got into the industry. So it's a love of that game, right? That's why we're all here. This whole thing is just a big game. Whether you're playing cat and mouse against you and every other attacker out there, or trying to figure out all the puzzle pieces to whatever application security assessment that you're doing. It's all a game. So how do I become a critical thinker? Okay, how do we go from looking at everything in black and white to starting to take that step outside of the box? First, it's asking those pertinent questions. It's asking it not only of you, but using your resources. Ask those around you. Ask those other people. Use the internet. Most of us were born on the internet. It's there as a resource as much as it can be, junk. Assessing statements and arguments, things that, a client might say about the way that a vulnerability was found or something that was reported. Understanding the flip side of that and why an organization might see something as important, might give you another viewpoint. Developing a sense of observation and curiosity. Again, that why not, right? We start asking both of those questions, and you start to get a much bigger picture, and everything starts opening up. Examine the beliefs, right? Examine what those assumptions, those opinions, those feelings, assess what those mean not only to when you're making that question or when you're making that assessment or assumption, but look at those other options and what else could happen within that. By listening carefully. Listening is one of the key things that a lot of critical thinkers do extremely well. To listen, to hear, is almost more important, if not more important, than trying to define or trying to figure it out for yourself by placing your words over something. If you can ask somebody else's opinion, ask somebody else's viewpoint, and find out that information, and then you can take all of those different viewpoints and figure out a middle ground, you'll be at a much better place than if you were just there solely trying to define something. It goes without saying, observing it with an open mind. If you observe something or if you look at something with an open mind, you're able to look at many, many, many different aspects as opposed to something just for what it is. Share the ideas. Open that up so you say, okay, here's my ideas. This is what I think is the problem. This is what I think can go. And let others, and take that other people's opinions or perspective into play. Because the way that you see it, and you apply 100,000 different viewpoints, use a forum. Or if you have a specific team, made up of 4 or 5 people, use those other viewpoints to try to get to that point where you can get to an answer. All of a sudden, it might be a much bigger picture than just whatever you saw at first at face value. And engage in active reading and listening. Active reading and listening. Always being that learner. Always trying to strive to gain more knowledge. That's going to make you the best critical thinker, and always trying to get to that next step, which is really that passion that I was talking about. That's going to make you the best pen tester out there. So thinking outside the box, the critical thinking, this is what drives us. This is what truly fuels every piece of our industry, every piece of our passion. We just need to make sure that we're always asking those questions, right? Striving to find out what, striving to find out why, how, why, and make sure we fight to make sure that the information security industry really is that bleeding edge leader as a supporter for critical thinkers. The more we standardize, the more we script, the more that we constrict the industry down to cost, time, streamlining, the farther behind the real world threat we become. If we don't stir the emotion and fuel the thinkers and hackers and crackers and everyone out there in a form or function that they can process and they can work, they will find an outlet for their creativity and their tools and talents somewhere. They can either be on our side or we can end up playing this game against them. So pen testing, hacking, information security, it's not about being in the box. It's not about following the leader. And it's not about and doing it the way that we have always done it. It's not about sitting there and sitting here just thinking about it. And it's about doing it. It's about taking that next step. Being a critical thinker, being a leader. The next ninja is in your hands. You guys are the future of the information security industry. Every single one of you sitting here. Believe and love what you do, for real, because that's going to be the passion that truly drives the information security industry. That's where the future is. If we let the streamlined, we let the box constrain and hold the information security industry, it's going to go one place, and that's only into those corners. Be that critical thinker. You know, when you make a mistake, learn from the mistake. A mistake is only a mistake if you didn't learn something from it. If it was a mistake and you actually took something and you learned something, it's research. It's not a mistake, right? So I want to come here, and as much as I enjoy hearing myself talk, I mean, obviously I've been doing this for a little while now, so you know, this is all about me, and it's not about you guys, I know. But I want to come next year, and I want to see your guys' talks. You know, you guys are the industry leaders. You are the ones that drive where this goes. You're the ones that are going to make those next steps and be the leaders in the information security industry. It's not anybody that's here today, it's where it's going tomorrow. You know, the future really is the ninjas. It's where you guys want to go. You are all the future ninjas. Whether you're up here now, whether you're up here in the future, you drive that. So I want to thank you guys for spending the last, hour with me, putting up with me up here drawing on. Really, truly, if we apply critical thinking and we think outside the box and we start to not only mold that with the science of it, we're going to have an industry that will go on forever but actually stand a chance. So any questions or anything? These are my details. Feel free to send me an email, question, hit me up on Twitter, what have you. I try to get to it as much as possible. Anybody have any questions in here right now? No, everyone's sleeping? I would be too. All right, thank you guys very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.